All right, we've kind of been rambling around on our study of Genesis. There's a lot to cover, and we could just really crawl along, and it would take us years to get through it. But we're going to try to hit the highlights and move on and talk about things I think that will help us. The book of Genesis really falls what I call under Christian evidences. I know that it's part of the Pentateuch and it's the foundation of the Bible. It deals with evolution. It deals with sin. It deals with a Savior. It deals with God's plan to redeem mankind. And so as we look at the book, I just want us to know that this book is here to give us the foundation that we need. Now, when we talk about salvation and talk about the gospel of Christ, it begins here in the book of Genesis. And because of that, it gives us a deeper understanding of what God has done and what God has planned and how God has planned to redeem mankind. So last week, we had talked about the various things. If I can find a little study guide that I had. Did we go through everything in that study guide? We talked about, see if I can find it. Y'all want a test? Here's a test that I gave them kids. That ain't it. On your study thing. We lack the last two. Okay. And I don't know why I didn't mark that off. But yeah, on number one, it's the beginning of the world, Genesis 1:1. Also the beginning of life, Genesis 1:11, 20, and 24. The beginning of the human race, Genesis 1:26, 27, beginning of family. Genesis chapter 2, verse 23, 24, beginning of sin. Genesis 3:1, 6 through 7, or 6 and 7. Beginning of God's plan to redeem mankind, God's scheme of redemption. Genesis 3, verse 15, this is the dealing with Christ, also the beginning of sacrifices. Genesis chapter 4, verse 3 and 4. And what we said about the sacrifices is that the oldest sacrifice is the burnt offering. And what it means is a total commitment to God. And that's the kind of sacrifice that Cain and Abel were to require. Now, it doesn't say that, but that's what it is. When you look at everything else, it puts that. And let me turn this off because I know somebody's going to be calling, probably the FBI. So Medicare, yeah. Or you have your extended warranty on your cars run out. So anyway, so also the beginning of nations. That's Genesis chapter 10, and that is the dispersion of Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their families and where they ended up or where they settled to begin with, and then, of course, the families from there. And so verse number 9, in Genesis chapter 11, verse 1, 6 through 9, it's the beginning of what? Languages. And you have to remember that it's not written in chronological order. That Genesis 11 is actually before Genesis 10. But Genesis 10 is he begins to show the dispersion of the human race and the settlement, but then he talks about the beginning of languages. And so what we talked about, I think we talked about it, that the earth was of one language and God confounded them through through language, confounded, they didn't understand. And that's the thing, if we can't understand what is being said, we ignore it. I think we ignore it. Well, most of the times we do. But it is hard to communicate without understanding of the language. Again, as they built this tower, the building of this tower, it's about pride. They're going to build a tower that reaches to the heavens. And I think a lot of this also might have to do, and it would be just speculation, that when they built this tower, I think what they had in mind was the flood, because the flood had just, happened a few hundred years before that. And if it was going to flood again, they were going to be above the floodplain. At least that's what it seems, but it may not. And it really doesn't matter. So the idea is Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel, is located somewhere in the Mesopotamian Valley and probably right around Babylon. At least that's what many scholars say. And then, of course, Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 3, it is the beginning of what? The Hebrew race, but the beginning of races, so to speak, of race, actually the human race, as we see this. So anyway, this is the call of Abraham, and Abraham is called out of the Ur of the Chaldees. He is called the father of faith among the Jewish people, among the Hebrew people. He also is known as the beginning of the Hebrew race. Any comment, any question? All right, and I think we talked about this in Christ in the book of Genesis, that he is the what? In Genesis 1, 26, 27, John 1, 1 through 3, Colossians 1, 16, Hebrews chapter 1, 1, 2, and 3. So what is Christ known for in the book of Genesis? The Creator. Colossians 1, somebody would turn over there to Colossians 1 and verse 16 and read that for us, please. Colossians 1 and verse 16.
For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him.
All right, so what happens in religion today is, of course, people get mixed up and they start thinking too much and they start reasoning too much. But over time, there were people who began to think that Jesus was not actually the Son of God, that he was a created being such as Michael. He was Michael, the archangel, and turned into Jesus. That's one concept. Others have that here you've got God here, and then you've got God, he had other gods, and then there's other gods, and then way down here is Jesus. And of course, you see that in the World Translation. Is it the New World Translation or the World Translation? It's probably the New World Translation. And I'm talking about Jehovah's Witness Bible. And the thing is, as we may have discussed this before, is that in the manuscripts, as these manuscripts, especially in the New Testament, were written, Paul wrote to the Colossians, they would copy it, send it to other congregations. And then the church at Galatia would get their book and they would write it and copy it and then send it around. So what happens was that when these congregations got a letter from Paul and they copied it and sent it, then eventually everybody had the same copy of all of the letters that were written, along with the Hebrew and the Bible or the Hebrew text concerning the Old Testament and the prophecies and the things of that nature. So they had the collections of all of these. And so when you have congregations of the Lord's church having the same manuscript, and this one has a manuscript This one has a manuscript. This one has a manuscript. And I'm simplifying it, but this is what happens. And this one and this one and this one, they all say the same thing. But now you've got one out over here that says something different than this one, this one, this one, this one. So what does that say? It makes you think that somebody's been messing with that manuscript. Somebody's been messing with it. So what happens in the New World Translation, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. So what does our Bible say? What does King James, New King James? What does it say? The Word was God. That's the King James, the American Standard, New King James, ESV, all others. And then the New World Translation says, was a God. That's the way they translate it, was a God. So this says that Jesus is not the Son of God. That's what this says. That he's not deity. He was just a God. And they get that from the misunderstanding whether he was the firstborn from the dead, other passages that today I have begotten thee, and they think that is the begotten there is the creation, but that's not what that passage means. That passage simply means this, that Christ had a purpose. He was begotten for a purpose, or not created for a purpose, but that he came into the world for a purpose. That's what it's saying. So that's what you have to be careful for when you look at these translations. And listen, I understand, because the King James is probably one of the hardest translations to understand in our day and time. Our day and time. Now, when it was translated in 1611, that's what everybody spoke. I mean, it was the common language of the people. And I like the King James. I like the New King James because it takes the words that we don't use in there and gives them the meaning for our understanding. And I find it to be very, very close. In fact, the New King James, according to most scholars, is the most literal translation. Now, the ESV claims to be the most literal translation, but Bible scholars will tell you it is the New King James that's actually the most literal translation. And it's just about sentence structure and the way you put words together and things like that. So, and I'm not trying to be critical. But we just have to, I'm just simply saying you have to be careful. And even you have to be careful with some of the Bibles you read, because even in the maps can be misguided, can be misunderstood, especially those of the Locke Foundation. The Locke Foundation translated the RSV, the Revised Standard Version, 1952, and they translated the fact that, well, Jesus was not born of a virgin; he was born of a maid. And you say, well, why is that? And they actually try to remove the deity out of Jesus. So why do they do that? They do it for money reasons. They translate Bibles for money. There's money in making Bibles. But you just have to be careful, even in the maps that are in the back, and even the footnotes. There is the Scofield Bible, and it in its footnotes talks about evolution, that the earth was created by evolution. And so you have to be careful what you read. Commentaries are just that, commentaries of men. And the Bible is its best translation. So, but what I'm saying in this, that Jesus here is seen as the creator. And there's so many passages. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1, 2, and 3. And then, of course, in the book of Genesis, or rather the book of John 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And then, of course, it says, verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So the point that I'm saying is that here is Christ even seen in the creation. And the Bible tells us that. And this tells us that Christ has the preeminence. The book of Colossians is fighting the Colossian heresy, and that was the worship of angels. It was the worship of the sun, moon, and the stars. And so what the book of Colossians, what Paul does is take Jesus and lifts him out of the world and puts him in his rightful place. He is God, and he is the creator of all things. That's what the book of Colossians deals with. He is the head of the church, which is his body. So it puts Christ in its rightful place. Now, the book of Ephesians deals with the church as the body of Christ. It talks about the body of Christ. And you have to understand that when Paul was writing to the Ephesian church and in that area, the temple of Diana was the most visible, it was the most beautiful piece of architect that ever was. And people worshiped Diana. It was the pagan god in which they worship. But what it talks about there is the church is greater than the temple of Diana. That's what it talks about. That's a very loose and quick summary of that, but that's what it says. And so the books of the Bible have a purpose, and that's what we understand. They're not there by accident. These words are not there just because they're filling up a page. They're there for a reason, and we need the Old Testament to show us about Christ and who he really is and things of that. All right, so any comment or any question concerning that part? Now, I gave you a handout concerning the timeline of Genesis. And this is pretty close to what the conservative scholars, or most scholars, are going to say, and talking about the time of Abraham, the time of Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. It doesn't deal with Noah. It doesn't deal with Adam or anything else. But how old would we say the earth is? I mean, how old do scholars say that I say scholars. How old does the evolutionist say that the earth is? 165 million years. That's when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. That's what they say. Now, how do they come up with that? Well, they look at the geological timetable, the geological table. They look at the animal when they look at the fossil record, in that they see in the layers of the earth, they see a little bitty trilobite, and that's a little 1 cell or 2 cell or 3 cell little organism that is there, and it's found way down in the strata of the earth. They find way down in the strata of the earth. And then here they'll find a creature that has a little bit more, it's a 1 cell amoeba or something else that's here. And then they'll find another animal here that's a little bit more complex, and then up here, and then of course humans are up here. So that's the way they measure that, and they measure these by time. And that's why they call it the timetable. So what they say is that the earth is 165 million years old, because that's how far down this little trilobite is. Also, the fact that they measure Earth. So to get 1 inch of soil on the earth, how long does it take? How long does it take to get an inch? Because when the leaves fall and they pile up and everything else, how long does it take for all those leaves to fall and you come up with 1 inch of dirt? It takes 1,000 years, according to scientists. It takes 1,000 years to do that. So they say that down here, you know, from here to here, 165 million years old. But what happens when you find, when you cover up the roots of a tree? What happens to it most of the time? It dies. So how long can a tree survive? Let me just tell you the problems that are there. The problem with this theory and with this theory is that not only is the trilobite found here, it's also found up here. That's one of the problems. They don't deal with that. They don't deal with this little trilobite all in the soil. But if it takes 1,000 years for 1 inch of soil, and it takes 165 million years, then what's the flaw of that? What can happen? So they found trees in the strata that have petrified. Some have petrified, but they found trees in the strata, and they were living organisms. So if it takes 1 inch, you know, by the time you get up about 3 or 4 inches, your tree may maybe start dying. And then, of course, there's another problem. Not only are there trees in the strata down here, that are trees that are upside down in the strata. So what would make a tree grow upside down? Or what would put a tree upside down? A flood. And see, they don't take that into account. And they paint, the National Geographic is world's worst. Time Life books, you remember those back in the 60s? Time Life books, they're the ones that started this evolution stuff, and you could get one for $1 and then mail to your house, and you pay $3.95 for every month, and you'd get all their Time Life. And evolution was a middle of that. And of course, then they had the dinosaurs, and they paint these terrible pictures. And of course, there's a lot of money to be made on dinosaurs, and especially with the way they present them. That they're terrible eating creatures, and they could not have existed with man existing on the earth at the same time. But the problem with that is they found footprints of man and dinosaurs at the same time frame together. Man and dinosaurs lived together on earth at the same time. So when we look at the timetable, according to the Bible, it's about 4,000 years old. 4,000 years in the Old Testament. And then, of course, you add 2,000. So you're looking at about 6,000 years for the age of the earth. So scientists can't handle that because they want to make room for evolution. So in Genesis chapter 1, someone read Genesis chapter 1 and then read Genesis chapter 1. I'm not Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and then Genesis chapter 1, verse 2.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water.
Okay, so in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and then 3, there's some men have inserted what they call the gap theory. The gap theory. That between Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and Genesis chapter 3, there is a gap. And within that gap, man was created, that you see about the Neanderthal and the pit down man and the evolution and the dinosaurs. This is where the dinosaurs ruled and reigned. And this is the things that we see in science. This is what the evolutionists talk about. So there is what they call the gap theory, that God created it and even made the dinosaurs and then the other creatures and even made the caveman, and then he wiped it out. Started all over again. That's basically what the gap theory says, at least parts of it anyway. But there's so much evidence that's found in the Bible that disputes that. I mean, that is just something that they have come up with, that they want to have a long period of time in between Genesis 1 and 2 and Genesis chapter 1 and 3. So, or maybe it's 4. But anyway, the point is that they're trying to insert evolution in the creation of the world and the creation of the earth. And it really does allow for that. And then, of course, not only the gap theory, there's the day-age theory, where, Peter says a day is as 1,000 years before the Lord. And what that says is time doesn't mean anything. But what they also put in Genesis chapter 1, between the first day and the second day, or it is eons of years between that. In other words, a day here could be eons of years, which is thousands and thousands, hundreds and thousands of years between them. And that's what they call the eons, or the days between that. So between day 1 and day 2, there's an eons of years. And between day 2 and day 3, there's eons of years. And it is trying to make room for what we call theistic evolution. We all know how to spell it. Theistic evolution, to say that God set it in motion. He set it in motion, and then, of course, the evolution took over and just gradually formed. But all of that is really disputed. I mean, when you look at Exodus chapter 20, and when God was giving this to the Israelite nation, the law and the 10 Commandments, as we call it and know it, there are things that are found in that scripture that help us understand what this day is. And the word is Yom, and Clarine gave me a piece of paper on that, and somewhere I'll misplace that, but I'll get that to you. We'll try to get that to you. And it's about the word Yom. And it can mean a 24-hour period, and it can mean thousands of years. But when we look at Exodus chapter 20, let's turn over there for a minute. Exodus chapter 20. And let's see what page is that on. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so in the commandments in verse number 8, it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That is Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. And in it you shall do no work, nor your sons, nor your daughters, nor your male servants, nor your female servants, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within the gates. Now notice this, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that are there in them, and rested the seventh day. And therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So this one passage, that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh. When we look at the days of creation, we see where anytime the word yom, as we mentioned, can mean 24 hours, and it can mean eons of years. So, when anytime that you put a number with a day, day 1, day 2, day 3, so and so, it's always 24 hours. It's always a 24-hour period. And that's exactly what happens when you get into Genesis chapter 1. So we get over to Genesis chapter 1 and begin in, what page is that on? All right, so you get over there in Genesis chapter 1, and it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And what you have to remember is that is a summary of Genesis 1 and 2. That's just a summary of it. That's just what happens. And then it says, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. So, God spoke light. So where does light come from? What does the Bible, what does John say about light? God is light. It comes from God. Jesus is the light of the world. God is the producer of light. And so the thing is that God said, let there be light. In all of this chaos and all of this mass confusion and all of this jumbleness, there was light brought in. And he separated the light from the day from the night. In other words, the light from the darkness. And so we have our light as it is now. Our light comes from the sun, but the sun won't be created till what day? The fourth day. So, but here's light that has been brought into the world. Life needs light. Life has to have light in order for it to exist. And so then he says, and then God said, verse 6, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Now, what does that mean? It's land, but also you've got waters here and the earth and matter. And so now matter is separated, and there's the earth, and then what's around the earth? There's water around the earth. And there's a firmament in there. Now, when you see Genesis chapter 6, you'll see that this is what we call the canopy theory. And the canopy theory states this, that when the heavens and the earth were created, there was a water vapor that covered the earth. And there's a lot of discussion about that. As we mentioned, Apologetics Press, we got a library full of this over there, but a lot of benefit in the water that is covering the earth. When you look up, you see clouds, but this is more than clouds. This is a water canopy that covered the earth. That's why Adam and Eve could walk around without any clothes on. And there's a lot of other issues, or a lot of other things. But so God separated the waters. Now the earth had water. In fact, the earth is covered with how much water? About 3/5, isn't it? The earth is 3/5 water, 2/5 land. Now, and I'm just telling you what the book. There's a book called Genesis Flood. And it's written by Whitcomb and Morris. And it's written, they're PhDs. And we had to read it when we were in the Memphis School of Preaching. It's very technical. It's very technical. It's very difficult to read and understand it. Brother Cates, I had on the test, did you read the Genesis Flood? Did you read it like did you scan it? Did you read it like a newspaper? Did you read it word for word? I said, I read it word for word, and then I didn't understand a single thing. That's what I put on it. And I wasn't counted off for that. So, but anyway, in the Genesis Flood says was a water canopy that covered the earth. And that's the reason why Noah and Adam and others could live over 900 years old, because of the sun and the filtration that it goes through, and you don't get those deadly rays that come in. So when it flooded, and this broke, and of course it flooded the earth. If the earth was to rain all of the earth was to rain all the water that's in the atmosphere, it'd only be about 2 inches deep on the earth. That's all it would be. And that's not enough to drown anybody, is it? So anyway, but we'll get into that when we get over there. So anyway, the second day was the waters were separated, earth from matter, separated. And then it says, verse number 8, and God called the firmament heaven, that space. So the evening and the morning were the second day. Now, that word heaven means, what it means is above. That's what it means. That's the definition of heaven, is above. And we know that there is the heavens where the birds fly. There is the heavens where we call space, sun, moon, and stars. And then there is the heaven where God dwells. That's the way if you can read my writing. That's the way we look at heaven in 3 different ways. So it could be where the birds fly, it could be where the sun, moon, and stars, it could be where God dwells. Most of the time, especially in the New Testament, he's talking about where God dwells. Be therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. That's where God dwells. So the point is this, that in this, there was separation between water and matter. The second day is the formation of the earth and the core of the earth. And then in verse 9 it says, and let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So now the seas and oceans are separated from the land that is there, the mass of land. We have about, and I said this in day 2, the day 2 he's talking about the water canopy. In day 3 he's talking about the water that is on the earth and the dry land that is there. And God called the dry land earth, and gathered together of the waters he called the seas, and God saw it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind. And those seed in itself on the earth and it was so. So anyway, so you get down to verse number 13, and that's the third day. So dry land appears, green earth, or the vegetation appears, and it's produced after its own kind. So anyway, all right, so today is what? The 26th. So next Wednesday is singing, is that right? Okay. All right.